You were listening to Words Off the Street, a discussion with police, fire, and EMS writers. We bring you their take on your world. Stay tuned for your host, BJ Schneider.
You are listening to episode 9.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's Word Off the Street. It's the Saturday before Mardi Gras here in New Orleans. We are standing on a balcony overlooking St. Charles Avenue, bringing you the show this week. The interview this week is going to be with retired NOPD officer Warren Pope. Seemed appropriate to put it here for the week for Mardi Gras. So stay tuned and listen to a great interview with him. And if you're lucky, we'll get in some sights and sounds of the parade for the website and for the show.
Today's show is brought to you by Xephos Books Training and Public Speaking. Xephos Books is responsible for the short story collections Welcome to New Orleans, How Many Shots Did You Hear? And Volume 2, Welcome to New Orleans, The Life You Save May Take Your Own. These collections are true stories from the author's years as a cop and a medic in the Big Easy. Xephos is also the publisher of the adventure fiction, A Salty Life and a Traitor's Death. This is a tale of a modern-day smuggler and a pirate caught in the middle of a fight for gold on the high seas. These books can be found on the website, xephosbooks.net, as well as your favorite ebook outlets. Xephos Books also does training in areas such as tactical medicine, safety, and arranges for public speaking at your function. So go to www.xephosbooks.net, that's Xephos Books, XIPHOSBOOKS.net, sign up for the newsletter, or visit their Facebook page and follow to get the latest news and releases.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first field interview. I'm sitting down at Mojo's Coffee Shop here in New Orleans with retired NOPD Sergeant Warren Pope to discuss his writing and career. Welcome, Warren. Thanks for joining us on Words Off the Street.
BJ, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you on. You and I have worked in the same places with some of the same people for years, and it took this show to get us to sit down together. Hell, we even went to the same high school. It's great to have you on. It's a strange little coincidence there, but it ought to make things interesting.
It's a small town. It really is. Every day I find out how small it is.
Isn't it weird? You know, you grow up in the same areas and the same places. I start every show off with the same question for everybody because I find it interesting to hear what touched people and addressed people early on. What's the first book that you can remember reading that kind of left an impression with you? And not necessarily as a writer, but as a, just something you read and went, damn, that's amazing. I like that. I really want to get more of that. Not that motorcycle that just went by, but,
right.
Or something that you read and went, I can do that, writing.
I never thought that.
Me neither. You read, as my father just sent me an email. He's an author also. He says, I'm reading Michael Connelly's first book. Thank you. And
damn
live
fans.
shows, folks, live shows. And he said, I'm reading Michael Connelly's first book, and now I know exactly how bad of a writer I really am. Yeah, well, we all can't make that kind of money. So what comes to mind when you think book-wise?
Really, the first book I remember leaving a real impression on me was Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain.
Oh, yeah.
I was young. I was real young, like 6 or 7. And that was like the first kind of adult book I read. I kind of graduated from the kiddie stuff. And it just left an impression the way Mark Twain would paint a picture that you could imagine and taking place in front of you. And I'm a big fan of Mark Twain.
And his satire is so amazing, and that's one of the first books I can think of that has so many layers. Somebody who can read it as young as you said, 6, 8, 10 years old, and you get that surface layer, you can go back and read that book 10 years later and get all kind of depth out of it that Twain was trying to put in there, some of the social political stuff he tries to bring across. Real interesting.
Oh, he's a genius. Or was,
Was.
Yeah.
Well, if he's still around, I want to know what he eats every day. And
you want to eat some too.
That's right. So we said all those years with NOPD. Tell us a little bit about your public safety background, where you came from, how you got into it.
Well, I joined the National Guard right after I kind of flunked myself out of LSU.
We've all had that moment.
I spent a year at LSU, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it was, I came back, and higher education kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. And I took every job under the sun, probably. And actually, it was a friend of mine suggested the National Guard. So I joined the Air National Guard and, went through basic and all that foolishness. And, once I got back, I worked on a shrimp boat, and that wasn't for me either. And I just thought about becoming a policeman, and, I had a little difficulty getting on the job at the time. It was, a time of, affirmative action, and I didn't fit the model that they were looking for. But eventually I did, and as far as background, I was at National Guard and the police department.
Yeah, kind of. Sometimes you stumble into those careers that become your lifelong.
Well, what happened is I failed the polygraph, and up till now, I haven't done anything wrong. I didn't lie about anything.
This show will ruin that for you.
That just infuriated me. That I've never failed anything either. I've always succeeded at what I tried to do up to that point. And to be told that I failed a polygraph, and actually what I was told was, you're white, you're going to fail. And lo and behold, I failed. And it kind of infuriated me, and I kind of got on the job out of spite. I was like, I'll be damned
if you're going to let this take me down. Exactly.
And I was all full of enthusiasm.
Piss and vinegar's okay.
Yeah. And to get on the job, and then I started learning what the job entailed.
Once you got there, you went, "What in the hell did I do to myself?"
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm like anybody else. Anybody listens to this, I had an impression of the police department from TV and the movies, and the cops were never confused. They always got the right guy. They never made a bad arrest, and that's what I thought I'd be doing. I'd be running around, picking up bank robbers and murderers, rapists, and
and like nowadays, you tell people, you do not solve every case in 60 minutes. It does not. It is not Law and Order. We do not.
No.
It does not work that way.
The vast majority of it is. One of the first calls my FTO, field training officer, allowed me to handle by myself was a case of maybe a 10-year-old girl didn't want to wash the dishes. And I'm looking at my FTO and I'm like, what am I going to say? This is not a police matter. It isn't, And he took over for me and chewed the little girl out and made her go in the kitchen and wash the dishes. And
I can tell a real quick FTO story for myself. One of my first days on the job, we go to the domestic, and we all know how that is. As a rookie cop walking in a domestic dispute, it's very off-putting. You don't really know what to do. There's not a lot of right and wrong. It's kind of hard to understand. Right. And they're yelling at each other, and my FTO's standing there, and he doesn't say a word, and he just watches them screaming and hollering at each other. And then he finally walks across the room and walks right over into the kitchen and opens their refrigerator. And he reaches in and he pulls out a can of Coke and pops the top on it. And the two of them stop talking and they turn and stare at him. And he's like, "Do I have your attention now?" And I'm like, "That was brilliant." That was just...
Okay, the one I have for you is, I was in the French Quarter. I had maybe 2 months under my feet, and, everything still shines. None of my leather gear had been scratched, wrinkled or anything. I had uniforms in my closet I probably hadn't worn yet. And, I'm riding with an old, experienced officer. We get a call of a bar fight. Mm-hmm. And, it's at a gay bar. We get there and, we open the door, the music is blaring. The lights are real dim. You can just, make out the shapes of bodies just flying back and forth. And like I said, I'm brand new. And I started to go into the bar and just start grabbing people and throwing them up against walls. But what stopped me is, Louis, my FTO, was in front of me. So I had to pass him. And he's just standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. So that kind of slowed me down. I'm like, I was constantly making an ass of myself. Every day I was, I can't believe.
That's part of being a rookie.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, I know that now. But as I was getting tired of, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. So it kind of gave me pause. Because I'm like, well, they got people in here beating each other up, and we just standing at the door, So I followed his lead. I stood alongside him. And
That was a school bus full of fine, outstanding New Orleans citizens.
Is it more of my fans? I can't keep. We ought to go inside, but he can't see me. But anyway, Louis standing at the doorway, and there's a couple of guys near the door. They see us, and they quit hitting each other, just like you said. They're looking at us, and they kind of distracted them, and so they quit hitting each other, and then they kind of rippled back through the bar. The fighting stopped. The bartender looks over, sees us. He turns the music off and flips the lights on, and we can see there's maybe about 20 guys in there, different stages of being beat up, and Louis just says, "What seems to be the problem?" To where I could barely hear him. So the noise in the bar just stopped. All of, bickering, and everybody's leaning forward, And officer, what'd you say? I said, "What seems to be the problem?" And the whole thing was diffused immediately. And finally, the two guys that started it, it was two best friends. I don't know if during the fight they, they elbowed somebody and they got number 3 involved, and next thing you know, the whole bar's in. Well, the two that started it came out, and we walked them to the car, patted them down, took them to lock up, and on the way back, I looked at Louis and I said, "How did you know to do that?" He said, "Well, what would you have done had you gotten there by yourself?" I said, "I was going to go in there and start grabbing people, throwing them up against the walls and all." He said, "What would have happened?" I said, "Well, somebody would have hit me, and you call for backup, right?" So, yeah. He says, "So next thing you know, you got 10 or 12 cops in there. There's people getting split, officers getting hurt, people going to the hospital. Your job is to enforce the law, keep the peace, not necessarily to go out and make a bunch of arrests." I said, "Yeah, but how'd you know to do that?" He said, "That always works." Just by talking low to where, I can't hear you.
Those old school FTOs are amazing. I mean, they don't have a dozen psychology classes under their belt. They don't have all this, all these other techniques, but their street smarts rule the day. They really, I agree that you learn so much from working with them over the years.
That's one of the reasons that I started to write. Those ways getting lost. I'm on the same subject, but when I was a sergeant in 3rd District out in Lakeview and Gentilly, it's a very, we nicknamed it Mayberry. It's so serene, and it's just, you have the lakefront, you have City Park and UNO and Delgado, but for the most part, it's suburbs, and it's like Leave It to Beaverland, and there's not a lot that goes on. I mean, I think we had like maybe one murder, like in a year, and which is, it's good. That's the neighborhood I live in.
Yeah.
But you don't have a lot of activity. You don't have a lot of experience with the officers. It takes an officer working that area a lot longer to get experience under his belt now. And one of the things that bothered me was that we had field training officers that came out of the academy, went to the 3rd, did a year on the street in the 3rd, and were now FTOs. And, half jokingly, I'd ask them, "What do you know? What can you impart to this recruit that just came out of the academy?" And it really bothers me that the state department is now. It's like a matter of the blonde leading the blonde. They're following the consent decrees and all, but the consent decrees are written by people that have no idea what they're talking about, and it just seems like a downward spiral. And I just wanted to capture some of the glory days of NOPD.
Right. So much, and so much of those street smarts is not something that you teach in a classroom. It's meant to be taught out there in the street, in the field, where you see it work. Like you said, if I sat in a classroom and tried to teach a bunch of guys, we're going to walk into a bar room, we're going to show ourselves and let them get the wrong impression, then we're going to lower our voices, and they'd be like, "What are you crazy? That's not going to work." But when you see it in action, you know exactly why it works. That's what's so amazing.
Oh, yeah.
So, talk about your first works when you started putting pen to paper. How did that come about? Obviously, from what you were saying, it started with some of that knowledge you wanted to get down, and
what actually happened, I've been thinking about this for a couple of days. In Growing Up in Blue, there's a story called Tavern, or The Tavern, and it's a story of me meeting this lady from La Jolla, California, and what a while I became friends with Peggy, and we spent hours on the phone. and developed a tremendous friendship, and I'd tell her stories, while we'd just talk to each other, and she encouraged me to start writing them down, and I had barely high school English, and what I wrote is police reports, which are dry as dust, and it's nobody aside from a DA would be interested
on such and such a date, officer number so and so arrived on scene.
So what actually happened is I wrote Tavern and emailed it to Peggy. She made some editing changes and stuff, sent it back to me, and we sent the story back and forth. And I think at the same time I was writing Explosion. But it was more like a hobby. It was just playing around and then Katrina came. And like I said, I live out in Gentilly, out by UNO, and I think in the lowest point of the whole city. I'm serious. My block was like the last one to drain out. Yeah, I mean, it was horrible. That's another story. But anyway, I was talking to Peggy on the phone one day, and I said, man, I lost everything. My computer's gone, hard drive and all. And she said, well, yeah, I have your short stories. I said, no kidding, huh? And so she emailed them back, and at the time I had a PC, she had a Mac. So without a back and forth emails, the formatting was destroyed. So I straightened them out a little bit, and that was actually the first writing I did. What really happened was after I retired, I started driving a cab. And I just found it kind of, it's my personality, but I found it kind of humorous that everybody out there, from Europe and Japan and different parts of the country, everybody knows how to be the police. and people would actually, as I'm driving past, say a police car with, 107s up on a wall, suspicious people. That cop's doing this wrong. Or this cop ought to call for backup. Or he should have done this first. And rather than just insult him, I tell him a story. Because I'm like, you don't realize why he's doing what he's doing, but I do. And I tell him a story, and oh my God, I didn't realize that. And are you serious? No, nobody ever told me that. And some of them were good stories, I thought. So as a hobby, I sat down at a coffee shop out in Lakeview, and I started writing them down. I'd post a few to Facebook, and I got real good responses to it. And at some point, I realized I had like 17 or 18 stories, which I felt was enough to make a book. So that's what I did. I learned how to format and assemble a Kindle book, and I released it. And I had some sales, but everybody wanted a paperback. So then I went back and figured out how to get with
learning experience with all that. I went through the same thing.
Oh, the older I get, the more I realize how little I know.
Isn't it amazing? At 18, you knew everything.
I knew everything. Yeah,
everything.
I probably could have told you how to treat a patient. And
well, and one of the questions I want to ask, because I went through the same thing, and being a great storyteller, honestly, that's a trait that is. It's kind of a lost trait in a lot of places. And being able to stand up and tell a good story, and it's something that I've been lucky enough to have. I mean, some people just say I'm full of crap, but I mean, I'm sorry. Annette here, who is doing our sound and all that, raised her hand to make sure she was signaling that, yes, she agrees that I'm full of crap.
Oh, but we got a witness.
That's right. But telling stories is one thing. Taking that story that you tell, where you say certain, you may use a voice, or you use a certain inflection, or you do other things when you tell it, and then taking that story and putting it on paper. I found sometimes that was a difficult thing to do, because they didn't relate the same way when they crossed over. Did you see that same issue when you wrote them, or was that a?
It wasn't so much my books. But I wrote another story in Growing Up in Blue, called Morale. It's a true story. It's one of my senior sergeants in the 5th District noticed that morale in the 5th District was abysmal. It's people would.
That was a very good story, by the way.
It's true. People doing anything they could to get out of going to work. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, Sarge, I just checked the computer, and I had 4 hours furlough accrued. Can I take it? And I'm like, it's 10:30 in the morning, you know. Yeah, would that be all right? Yeah, go ahead, take off. You know, people had zero sick leave. Any time they could get injured.
Just get away.
It wasn't as bad when I got there. It was pretty bad, but Fenner, the sergeant, noticed, you know, and the 5th District, it just had a stigma. It's just another area of town. It's nothing drastically different from any other district, but it was seen as a punishment district. And people were threatened with the 5th. I mean, I was threatened my whole career. Would do that one more time, and I'm sending to the 5th. And it just it had a stigma. And like I said, there was nothing tremendously different about the 5th than any other district except the 3rd. And Fenner realized the missing ingredient was morale. And he started a newsletter. As silly as it sounds, that turned the entire district around. And just like you're saying, like for me to say that you're stupid and ugly, it might hurt your feelings. But if I write that down and put it in writing, you want to kill yourself almost. It's so much more powerful when you put it in writing. And I saw that firsthand in the 5th District. And that encouraged me I got, eventually, well, you know, one of the chiefs came up with a shift to have us work 12 hours, and that was going to increase manpower and whatnot. We actually got to a point where we ran out of radio numbers. And if you can appreciate, you know, the platoon commander is 10. He'd be 5'10", and then you'd have 5'20", 5'30", 40. 50 was the second in command of the district. 60, 70, and 80 were task force sergeants, and so we only had like the 4 numbers to work with, and we'd have 5 or 6 sergeants working. So we'd share radio numbers, and it'd be like, you know, BJ, you answer this time.
520 A and B.
Yeah. It got to be, anyways, some kind of way I ended up in the 3rd District, and I didn't really want to be there, so I started my own newsletters. I have a tactful way of insulting people that people find humorous, and I was ripping people left and right, and they loved it. I mean, I tried to remain anonymous. I didn't want the captain to find out who I was. And I got to the point where I'd assembled a newsletter at my house and run the Kinko's, shoot off about 50 copies, keep the receipt, file the receipt, because I was waiting for PID to come knock on my door and accuse me of, you know, misusing department property. And here's my receipt. And then the desk men in the city set up a distribution network to where these were going citywide. And I always got a kick out of that. And the book's a lot more impersonal than a newsletter can be. But
and that's what I found about your writing, is that having worked in the city for so many years, working as a medic, having worked as a policeman here in the city, not with New Orleans but with the state, you got that feel, you got that flair, and I'm a big believer that we're going to hold for 1 second.
So one of your brothers, huh?
Yep. That's fire, yeah.
No.
I always found that the city itself was a character in almost every story, and that if you can write the city and the flair of that city and what's going on, it makes a major difference in how it gets laid out. The stories that you wrote, granted, a lot of them could have happened in any big city around the country, but the way that you tell them really gives it that New Orleans flair, and I think that's very important.
You know, it's funny you'd say that. When I started writing, I had an impression of feeling that everything that happened to me was unique, that I was the only one this happened to, and I'm the only one who reacted the way I did. Back in the 80s, I had occasion to stop a young kid, like 16, 17 years old. When I went to pat him down, he had like a .38 revolver in his waistband. So I kind of held him against the wall, took the gun out, and held it up to him. He craned his neck, over his shoulder. And he said, "Officer, I'm going to tell you the truth. These ain't my pants." And I had to hold on to the kid because he could have walked off. I mean, I think I did laugh. I don't know if I could have fought it that well. "These aren't your pants." He says, No, I was at my cousin's house, and I was in a hurry, so you didn't notice there was a gun in the waistband when you put them on, and he just kind of shut up. But as I'm flipping through these Amazon books, there's a title out there called "These Ain't My Pants." So I bought the book. It's written by a talented officer from Seattle, and he had a similar story. In his case, it was narcotics, which that kind of made more sense. That I didn't notice there was something in my pocket, not the waistband. And as I read his stories, I could tell you the same stories. And people have, believe it or not, I always stick a card with my phone number and email address in it, when I sell these books from the cab. People have got in touch with me and, from all over the country, New York and Chicago and on. Man, the same thing happened to me. I slowly realized that my stories are universal.
Silly people are universal too. So.
Oh yeah, exactly. But you think a place like Seattle, Washington, couldn't be more different than New Orleans.
Yeah, you would think that they were apples and oranges trying to compare the population and the way they grow up. But we have so many unique things too. I mean, the podcast that'll be coming out in a couple of days. I guess it'll be about 4 podcasts back from this one for anybody listening, with Bernard Schaefer. He's a detective in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And him and I are having a long conversation, and don't ask, but somehow king cakes come up in the conversation. And the 5-minute discussion on trying to explain to him what a king cake is, why there's a baby in it, and then I have to explain the epiphany to him. I was exhausted by the time I was finished. So that's truly, no place else has that kind of lunacy.
Well, yeah, on the same subject. I drive the cab all day long, every day. People aren't even aware that Mardi Gras, the date of Mardi Gras floats. So I have to explain that it's Easter's the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the spring equinox. 30 days before Easter is Lent. The day before Lent is Fat Tuesday. And then the parade's back up from there. And it's never the same day. It's not like, Christmas.
No, it's this complex calculus formula to figure out when it is every year.
Which is off the subject, but, the Romans kept pretty good records.
Yeah.
And it seemed like we could narrow down Christmas, but we can't nail down Easter.
Well, you notice the Epiphany is the same date every year, but Easter moves, which screws everything else up for all of spring. So.
Oh, it's hysterical. Well, I guess you had the same experience. The rolling of the eyes and, this guy's lying to me. He must think I'm stupid. And it's like, no, it's a religious holiday, believe it or not. And, yeah, I get a kick out of it.
Always. It's always fun, especially when you get those people from Middle America.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's commonplace. It doesn't make sense that a worldwide international attraction would be located across the street from a housing project. It doesn't compute with people.
Who would have thought of that?
I mean, do you ever feel threatened at Disney World?
No.
And you have to explain, and again, people look at you, even though you're saving their lives, like, you must really think I'm stupid. I can't believe, trust me.
You seem that you talk to the tourists. I mean, here we are sitting on Magazine Street, and it's, the neighborhood we're in is very different than it was 10, 15 years ago. You worked the 6, so you know how different.
We would have been robbed 3 times already.
But you go down St. Charles Avenue, which is so beautiful, and it's so well done. People don't realize within 1 block you're back in slums in some areas, and you just can't wander wherever you want.
Oh man, I can't tell you how many people have stopped on Chapatulas, like in this neighborhood, walking at Tipitanas, and because on the little giveaway maps, it's only 3/4 of an inch or so from Canal Street.
I can walk that far.
And hop in.
So, are you working on anything new? Any new books or stories you're putting together now?
Well, what I started out to do was I wanted to write a novel explaining my, the kid that was from the suburbs that was full of piss and vinegar and was going to save the city, to kind of soured, jaded, burned out sergeant. And it didn't happen overnight, of course. And that's running from the police. And as I got into it, I realized it's going to be a huge work to go from, me being 20 years old to 45 and different assignments I had and different, ranks I attained. So, and a friend of mine suggested a serial novel. which I thought was a good idea. Yeah, I could put out different sections of the book. And I'm up to part 4, and I'm getting close to the end. But I also realized that in order to write a novel, you have to kind of gloss over a lot of detail. You can't write a novel with the depth coverage that you'd give a short story. So I started parallel writing the serial novel and short story collections, to where, with a short story you can go into as much detail as you want. With a novel, the book could turn out to be War and Peace, and people can lose interest.
Well, I think the serial novel is a great idea too, because it gives people the opportunity to start and move through the career and find their favorite parts. If it's anything like me, you may go back and read certain stuff, especially the portions that you may feel more personal to you as you go about it.
Yeah, it's and it's also, it forces you to examine your own life. In my case, realize what the turning points were, and people find it interesting. I got some fans out there, believe it or not, because it doesn't take long to write. The hardest thing for me is just getting. Well, first you have to pick out what story you can tell. And as you know, that you can't tell everything. And you just focus on, in my case, it was like the emotions that kind of evoked in me. It was, be it surprise, laughter, humor, horror. I kind of think in almost theatrical type mode. Like, I could see as I'm writing the story unfolding and people's, facial expressions changing and whatnot. And once you have that set in your mind, what you're going to write, writing it is almost typing. I mean, it's almost...
It flows out of you once you...
Right.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part, is just deciding what you can tell and from what perspective, and,
Yeah, I can relate with that completely. One of the hardest parts I've always found is the actual getting started, to sit down, to start that writing process, to be undisturbed and get it going. Then once it's there, it starts to move. But if I'm sitting down and I get distracted by Facebook, or, oh, look, let me look at this website, and then I find I'm sitting there 2 hours and I've only written a couple of hundred words, and they're shitty words, and I got to go back and start over again. So it's really about focusing is such a big part.
That's really that Story Tavern I mentioned before. What that was my exposure to Len Davis case. And for people that aren't familiar, Len Davis, what happened in the late 80s, early 90s, the city was having a horrible recruitment problem. And, the job didn't pay at all. There was no backup. People like today, people were thrown to the wolves left and right. New Orleans was pretty much a cesspool. A lot of the applicants applying lived outside of the city. But the city had a residency requirement that mandated people live in the city. And that's part of my writing, too, is that it shows that police aren't a separate race. That, we're just human beings, and the applicants are married, they might have children, and the wives didn't want to come to the city. You can't send your kids in good conscience to a public school in New Orleans. So it's a financial burden to move to the city, send the kids to Catholic, to private school. And so they were really having trouble attracting people. And I remember one of the councilmen stating, when it was explained to him why we were having so much difficulty, and the end result was supposed to be to eliminate the residency requirement. But this councilman got up and said, well, if we can't get a bunch of A-class recruits, can we get a bunch of B's and C's? And that's what they did. They started lowering the standards, and we ended up with some gangsters in uniform. And it was national news, maybe international news, when a gang was caught down in the 5th District.
Remember it very well.
Well, what I wrote was my angle. I didn't know the officers. I didn't work in the same area, but I was still affected by it.
It affected everybody with a badge, it was really amazing to listen to somebody's point of view. Like here you are in blue, with the same department, wearing the badge, and having no direct involvement in it, but to feel that trickle down, to feel that how that affects everybody in the department.
Oh yeah, and I'm a big fan of history and all, and for every major event that takes place, there's, like you're saying, there's just so many ripples that go out, and what happened with Len Davis could have affected somebody in Biloxi, Mobile, for all we know, and but you'll never hear about it. All you hear about is the major event itself and the major players. It tickles me to read some of the stuff I write, really.
Well, what's your favorite of all your books or stories? What's the favorite of your work?
The best received story I wrote was called "She Was Shot," and that was at the time I was under a huge suspension. I was demoted. I was given 4 months off. I started driving a cab to survive, and while I was I went back to work as a patrolman in the 7th District, New Orleans East, but I kept my cab. When I get off, I was working the second watch, 3 to 11. When I get off work, it was just a habit. I'd come home, change clothes, and take the cab out for a couple of hours. And back then, the business was a lot better. But it was my take on LaToya Johnson, the first NOPD female officer killed in the line of duty. It was from my perspective, because I wasn't, like you said, I didn't have my radio with me. I didn't know what was going on. I had to actually see it. And people told me that the emotions came out real strong, and they were moved by the story. And I posted that to Facebook, and that was forwarded all over the place. I think that would have to be maybe my most popular.
What's your personal favorite? What's the one you're the most proud of?
That's really hard to say. It's because a lot of the stories are so different. That story, Christmas, that involved me in the same FTO I mentioned earlier with the bar fight, and how I was kind of introduced. I was kind of getting accepted by the other officers. My writing's been described as humorous. And one of my reviewers stated that I'm really hilarious because I'm not trying to be. I'm just relating what happened, and I'm not trying to make a joke. It's just the situations I found myself in were humorous.
Yeah, it seems like we and that's another thing I don't think people realize about being under the badge for so many years. Granted, you see some scary stuff, you see some sad, some ugly stuff, but the amount of just downright ridiculously funny things you see on the job, I don't think most people would realize just what you see with human nature and the silly things people do.
Well, one of the things I learned right away, we got a lot of naked women calls. And one of the first things I learned was don't go.
Yeah, folks, if you're out there and you're hearing that, some of y'all went, ooh, naked women call. Trust me, if the naked women call comes across the police radio, you don't want to go to it.
No, I've never seen anybody naked that you'd want to see naked.
Yes, first thing you do is throw blankets over people. You definitely want to do that. So,
you made me think of a 24 medical call in the St. Thomas Project where I helped, but it was the poor EMTs. Had to get this woman. I'm not to be derogatory, but she had to be 1,000 pounds, and just to get her out to the ambulance, we had to put blankets on the floor, roll her out of bed, and pull the blankets and slide her to the door. And it's not funny, but if you were standing there watching us, you'd be laughing.
It's that dark humor. I mean, it's the watching the car accident, even though you shouldn't be staring at the car accident, but you can't help yourself. And that's the kind of humor. And after you work the street for so many years, you definitely find that dark, that black humor as an expression of what you do. And we'll definitely talk off the air afterwards, because I think I was on that call. I was one of those poor EMTs. So. Oh God, yes.
There was more than one.
When you read for personal enjoyment, what genres do you read? What are some of your favorite authors or books?
I really get a kick out of Donald Westlake. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote The Hot Rock. I think they made 4 or 5 movies out of his books, and he wrote comical criminal capers. Well, he just gets into these convoluted, complicated plots.
Well, you talked about how a lot of people wanted paper books. When you read, paper or do you read electronically?
I do a lot of reading on my iPhone with Kindle. Personally, I prefer paper, but I don't have any problem with Kindle. And I also have some audiobooks out there.
I need to add that to the list because that's a good point. I'm a big audiobook listener because I'm on the road a lot for work. You being in the cab all the time now, you can spend a lot of time with the audiobook. And nothing against stuff on paper, but I find I'm able to get through a lot of audiobooks easier because of the way you can focus on them a little different.
Oh, they're great for traveling, and like you said, long drives. And I have some excellent narrators. And I had to get a guy from New Jersey to have a narrator that sounds similar to me. And everybody wants me to narrate it myself. I tried, and it's just beyond me. I'm not a good narrator, and
it is definitely a task.
Like you were talking about earlier, you were talking about the soap opera actors who would be fed their lines in one ear and recite them correctly.
Yeah, I could recite whatever they said in my ear, but it would sound like gibberish whenever it came out. Take a minute, tell us where our listeners can find your books, your both electronic and paper, your audiobooks. Where can they find your work, Warren?
Amazon would be the easiest place because they list all the versions of the books, and
that's going to be under Warren V. Pope, correct?
Warren V. Pope.
All right, folks, and I'll also make sure that in the show notes that we have a list of Warren's author page and a little write-up on the books and the audiobooks so that you can directly link right to them and find them. Warren, thanks so much for coming on with us and doing this interview. We had a good cup of coffee. We get to sit out here and watch the strange inhabitants of the city of New Orleans move by. Always a good night when we can do that. You'll have to come back on, and we'll have to get you on again sometime.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it. I can't get over how much this neighborhood's changed. We would know, like you're saying, 10 years ago, no.
This is 10 years ago, they'd have whacked us in the head, stole all the recording equipment, and run down the street. So, but it's nice now to be a little different.
Well, 10 years ago was post-Katrina, so probably 12 years ago.
There was nobody here, yeah. Well, 10 years ago, it was an empty wasteland. All right, everybody, thanks for listening to Words Off the Street. Remember, come back and listen to us as we hear your world and their words. Well, that was an excellent interview with Warren. We're sitting here with drinks, watching the people move by as we're waiting for the next parade to get started. Stay tuned for the show next week. We'll be having another great guest on. Thank all of you for listening. I'm sitting here with my son, Blade. Say hi, Blade.
Hi.
Remember, you can always find the show at wordsoffthestreet.com. You can find us at Facebook at Words Off the Street. And you can always send us an email at streetwordspodcast@gmail.com.
Bye. See you next time.
You heard him. See you next time, folks.